exploring both belief and non-belief, all right, and to see really doubts. For example, the question of doubts, are they good or bad? We looked at it last week and said, well, depends what you do with the doubt. Do you just let it sit there and fester, or do you do some investigating? Okay? And again, doubts are really something that should be seen on both sides of the matter. So because doubts and unbelief are really, do you remember what they are really? Anybody? So when we don't believe something, when we doubt something, what are these really? Well, like Keller said, it is an alternate. Usually it's an alternate set of beliefs that are speaking up, right? So it's not just I doubt what you're saying, but a lot of times when you talk about doubt, it's actually a whole alternate set of beliefs that come with it. So we've got to discover what the beliefs are and take a look at those beliefs, right? So we look for the assumptions, we look at the beliefs behind the doubt. The last thing we looked at was secular dissatisfaction, which is, although it was predicted, decades ago that religion would kind of eclipse because of the modern way of thinking. Instead, the opposite has happened. Not just with Christianity, but also other forms such as Islam and perhaps Buddhism. This is because of this human kind of a feeling that there is more to ourselves than just materialism. Right? And for example, we talked about what secular, non-Christian philosophers and thinkers have acknowledged that, for example, things like human rights, which we all believe in, which we all think are a good thing, actually derive only from the Judeo-Christian worldview, right? We didn't explore this in detail, but we will in upcoming classes, right? So again, this is something which is very upsetting. If you don't believe in God, human rights are just kind of a fiction. We like it, but there's no real reason for it. Right? So the other thing is that the whoosh, I guess, is when you look at a great piece of art, whether it's music or visual arts or writing or whatever it may be, you experience something which even secular thinkers call almost spiritual. So what is going on there, or is it just an illusion? Okay, so this is kind of what any comments about these topics from last week? Okay. Oh, I see. Is that Amy and Debbie?
Hello. Yes, here we have a new friend, Amy, joining us through Zoom. Yeah.
All right. Go on. Mention
yes.
You may be joining.
Good morning, everybody.
Okay. And last week, last week I wasn't checking the chat that much, but I'll try to do a better job this week. And okay, so today we're going to look at something the philosopher Immanuel Kant, put forward, and not as scary as it sounds, okay? Because I didn't have the opportunity to study philosophy formally in school, but philosophy is really thinking about the world. And so we'll see some of the material from today is from this other book by Dinesh D'Souza, where he talks about various arguments, positive and negative, for and against Christianity, along with the reason for God by Tim Keller. A couple of other helpful books in case you're exploring these questions. One is The Case for Christ by Elise Strobel. Very easy to read, very, very interesting. And the other book, What Has Christianity Ever Done for Us? Kind of interesting. D'Souza covers some of the material, which might be surprising to even for Christians, right? So in case you don't know, for example, they may talk about how we would think of monks in Europe as kind of, I don't know, maybe doing not much, but they actually transformed a lot of the swamps of Europe into a usable land. So here's another. If you're exploring philosophy in general, it's a really, really great introduction to philosophy. Very, very well done. So, okay, so let's start off with an exercise. Name some things in your room where you are that you can't see, but they're there.
Air.
Air. Okay. Very important. Okay.
See? Yeah.
Gravity.
Yeah.
What is that? Gravity. All right. Yeah. Very, very important. Okay.
TV signal.
yeah. TV signals. Okay.
Actually, yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Spirit and soul.
Spirit and soul. Okay. That's a more theological and perhaps debatable thing. Yes. Normally you can't. Okay. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. If you're thinking about other things, how do you know they're there?
Well, we know Wi-Fi is there because it's working.
Okay. All right. Because it's working. Okay. Yeah. This past week, our Wi-Fi stopped working, and boy, it's amazing how different life is without it. Okay. What else? How do you know they're there?
Well, we are alive and breathing and talking, so.
So you have air.
So we have air, oxygen.
If we know we put something in a drawer, we know it's there, so we can go back to get it.
That's an interesting. That's an interesting statement.
We know something's in the drawer. We can't see it right now, but if we open the drawer, we remember we put something in the drawer, right?
Right.
Okay. Hold on to that thought.
There are things we cannot see, but we can experience the end result.
Okay, we experience the results of some of these things, right? Okay. What are some other things that we take on faith? Yeah, gravity. Well, I can see you all still not floating, so I'm assuming where you are, there's gravity.
Well, there are many things you have to take in faith. For example, you walk up to a chair in your house. You typically don't press it, but use your hand to see if it will hold your weight. You just sit on it, right?
You just sit on it, yeah.
But,
Right.
but until one day you realize it actually crumbled, but you actually do sit on it, and even something very small. So you cannot live without faith, honestly speaking, right?
Okay, a lot of things we actually take on faith, right? Can you maybe a couple other things before I move on? How many of you take multivitamins? Do you actually know what's in them? How do you know what's in them? Sometimes I wonder, right? Because it's just a powder. I mean, how do you really know what is in them? It's listed on the bottle. What else? Anything else? How about when you drive your car? Is this something you take on faith?
Yeah, that the brakes are working. Right?
The brakes are working, right? What else do you take on faith when you're driving around?
But other people are going to follow the rules.
Yeah. Other people are not, going to crash into you on purpose, right? Otherwise, we would never step out of the, never step out of the house. So really, faith is a really, it's not just a religion thing. It's not, it's something that we do all the time, and we have to, in a sense. If we don't, we'd be paralyzed. We'd be stuck in bed. Well, we like to be stuck in bed anyway.
Yeah.
But
actually, if you allow me to say something. Actually, something that people have considered to be. There was a period of time people think that science is opposite to faith. But my take is that you cannot do science without faith, right?
Right.
Science is based on this called uniformity principle. The law of gravity works here, works in another state, another country, even on another planet, right? It's just numbers different. But how do you know?
Right.
Nobody knows, right?
Yeah. And actually, we'll talk about that also in more detail, later. But sure, science is actually based on faith, on a lot of different beliefs. So, and a lot of those beliefs actually, surprisingly, can't really be proven. Okay, so it's kind of strange. But we'll take a look at that as well. All right. So one thing that Tim Keller put forward as an exercise is this idea of deconversion stories. So in a lot of deconversion stories, which is people who supposedly they believe in God, and then as they grow more mature and more educated and older and wiser, they realize that it doesn't make sense. So let's look at one of these stories. This person named S.A. Joyce. He says, in the years after leaving military, I went back to college and to prove myself, and then I kind of pieced together bit by bit a set of beliefs, humanistic set of values, which are far more self-consistent, right, and pertinent to the modern world than a petrified decalogue. So the decalogue is the 10 commandments of biblical taboo. Right? So so look, it's becoming clear to me the universe behaved pretty much as might be expected if God didn't exist or didn't care. It gradually dawned upon me that in the grand scheme of things, there's no grand scheme. God performed no observable function and no valid purpose. The question entered my mind: what is a God without purpose and for which there is no evidence? Non-existent came the obvious answer. Okay, so the blinders of dogma and the yoke of dread were finally off. For me, the universe now shone in a wholesome new light, the comforting glow of reality, no longer distorted either by the almost cartoonish artificial glory of myth and miracle, or by the dreadful glare of hellfire. I was free. Okay, interesting. So he calls his testimony: one night, I prayed to know the truth. The next morning, I discovered I was an atheist. All right. So there are a lot of similar narratives put out, today, and they're very powerful stories. And if you can remember, what are some of the thoughts leading to his deconversion? And so I'm going to actually go back here. Oops. And so you can so you can pick anything out of these.
Faith in God seems like just a bunch of burdens.
A bunch of burdens?
Yep.
What kind of burden?
It's probably worse than the burdens. She said dogmas and what was the other term she used? Dogmas and yoke of dread. That's her experience. That's her understanding of her belief.
Okay.
You want to get off? I would want to get off if that's how I didn't know too.
Okay. All right.
This is Alice. She took some self-improvement. I went to college trying to improve myself, did a few things. Life was good. So she figured, hey, I did that accomplishment on my own. And she doesn't quite see God in it. So she makes no difference, I think, in her opinion.
Okay.
That God doesn't exist. She did it by herself. Life goes on.
Okay. All right. I did it by myself. Life goes on. Right.
Yeah.
I don't. Right. Without God, I'm fine.
Right. I don't see God's influence on me. I did it on my own. Something like that.
Okay. Anything else? Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. Anything else before we go on?
And I think on top of that, the blinders and dogma and yoke to her is constraining her. And she doesn't want any of that. She wanted to be free. At the end, says, I was free.
I was free, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. For the record, I don't know whether it's a man or a woman, but let's just assume. Let's just assume. So yeah, there's no need to believe in God to explain the world, right? Because we live in an age where we know so much. There's the problem of evil. Things happen, bad things happen, and God doesn't seem to be around. God doesn't seem to care. That's what she's experiencing. She's saying, I'm still a good person. I'm still concerned about justice, but I don't need God for that. I don't need God for a fulfilling life. I'm facing reality, So I've realized I don't need God, and now I'm brave enough to turn away from God, this need for God. Now I'm more tolerant and I'm more open. And basically, it's what Keller calls a subtraction story. It says after reason and science kind of remove faith in the supernatural, that's what you're left with. If you're a reasonable person, this is what you have, right? Okay, but a reminder again that a lot of these claims or thoughts really are a set of separate beliefs. They're a set of assumptions, which you may derive from different sources, and they should be each doubted and examined, which you will do. Okay, so
Cliff, before you go too far, is there a difference between? I know there's a difference between faith and facts.
Difference between faith and facts.
Yeah. Okay. Faith sounds like it's like you believe it even you don't see it. Whereas the facts, I think, needs to be proven, right? Even though we know there's oxygen in the air, we don't see it though. But to me, I think that's facts. We need oxygen to breathe. Human needs oxygen, and gravity is given. So to me, gravity is facts. It's science. It's given.
How do you know that? How do you come to that conclusion?
Chairs don't move.
No, oxygen.
Oh, oxygen.
How do you know that?
Well, because I breathe.
No, I mean, how do you know that you need oxygen to breathe?
Well, it's given.
Who gave it to you? Who gave it to you? I mean,
that's why I want to know the difference between faith and facts. To me, whenever he said faith, to me, that's facts. I mean, the fact is that we need oxygen also.
Well,
yeah.
How do we know that?
Well, how do you know about faith?
Somebody taught you that, right? I mean, somebody taught you that.
Right,
And
I learned that.
You believe them. You believe them. How do you come to believe them? You have to have faith in them.
Because it's true. The facts is true, so I believe it.
How do you know it's true? You did an experiment. You measure the amount of oxygen. I mean, that's
you pinch your nose. Juan, you pinch your nose. You don't breathe. You die.
How do you know you die? I mean, honestly speaking, have you tried that?
Try it, Juan. Pinch it for a minute. See what happened. And don't talk.
Right.
You're not getting to my point.
No, what is your point?
Whatever you say is fact. Behind that is a faith. Okay.
No, behind is the belief.
Is a belief or the faith? Yeah.
Okay, fine. All right.
Oh, Daniel, do you have something to share, Daniel?
I think what Guan is trying to say is that, like, even with science, though, like we take it for granted that the facts that are imparted to us,
right?
We don't have to experience them themselves to actually understand it. For example, when he says, "Have you pinched your nose and tried death?" Like, you haven't actually experienced death, though, right? So the assumption is that if you don't breathe in oxygen, you'll die, but you haven't experienced that yourself. So you assume that that's what will happen to you. That's where it's not so much a dichotomy between faith and science or faith and fact, but rather it's kind of maybe a spectrum. And at some point, the line gets a little bit blurred, and then we just kind of, just because we're human beings that like things to be simplified, we just say, you know what, I'm just gonna call this fact or faith, rather than acknowledging that there's kind of a mixture of the two in between.
Yeah, right. So generally, yeah, and generally, what I was gonna try to summarize it was that facts are things we have lots and lots of. Well, let me see. I was gonna say lots of faith in, but maybe it's kind of the reverse.
A lot of confidence.
Like lots of confidence in, right? And we call those facts. So for example, to Guan's point, we're saying we need air to breathe, we need oxygen to breathe. How do we know it's oxygen we need? First of all, how do we know that we won't die? Even if you see someone else die from pinching their nose too long, how do you know it's going to happen to you? Right? So so these are things which we kind of seek a best explanation for, and some we call them facts. I don't know. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. I think they're
kind of, right?
Yeah, they're kind of pretty similar. It's sort of like a Venn diagram. They start overlap some.
Okay. Ed has raised his hand. Ed, are you on mute, Ed? Oh, it was Ed's phone. So I don't know why it's Ed. He might have been his phone. So that's the thing about faith. We see someone raising a hand, but we don't know whether it's Ed or Ed's phone. Okay. Now. So here's the question again: are these beliefs empirically proven? Right. So that kind of goes to your question, Alice. And actually, we'll see it's actually much worse than that. So Keller's thought is to move from religion to secularism is not a loss of faith, as we kind of talked about last week, is a shift into a new set of beliefs. It's a new community of faith, right? And this community of faith, secularism, also has its orthodoxy and heresy, right? Even in the secular world, there are things that you're just not allowed to say. We'll let me see a little bit of that as well. So it's a new religion in itself, that there are things taken in faith and there are heresies and there are orthodoxies, which if you violate them, you're going to be thrown out of the community. Okay? So some people have experienced that, in the secular world. So, all right. So there's probably a sheet going to be passed about attendance. I think we know everybody here, so I think we're okay. Last week there was someone named BC. Does anybody know who that was? Okay, maybe we'll find out another week. But again, if you have any questions, feedback, you can email them to me. All right, so something we encounter a lot these days is people who are saying, I don't believe in God because I'm living my life by reason alone. Everything I do, everything I believe is only based on reason, right? But then the question again is, do we usually really believe things through reason alone? And then the next question is, actually, can we do this, right? The claim to live only by reason, is it really reasonable? Is it really a thing? It's a popular claim, but is it really a thing? And we saw earlier, a lot of things we believe or the way we live really is by faith, right? But let's see some attempts here. And for example, here is Ayn Rand, who said that blind belief, unsupported by or contrary to factuality, faith is extremely detrimental to human life. It is a negation of reason. So she's comparing reason to faith, right? And generally Christianity. Religion might have good principles to teach, but in a contradictory context and on a very, how should I say, dangerous or malevolent base on the ground of faith. So she's not a big fan of faith. She says faith is the worst curse of mankind as the exact antithesis and enemy of thought. So this is a very popular view of what faith means. Right? Here's Richard Dawkins. Faith is a state of mind that leads people to believe something, it doesn't matter what, in the total absence of supporting evidence. It seems to qualify as a kind of mental illness. So the question is, are these valid definitions of faith? Any thoughts on that?
Both of them are extremely well liked, and because they could not, neither of them could not answer the fundamental question of why we exist. Dawkins, he has no answer. He would point back to like, oh, maybe Big Bang and evolution, but they don't explain why we exist and why are we here. They don't provide the answer. And why do we need to be nice? Why do we need to love one another? Why do we need to do some of the things that reasoning is based on? Reasoning means you have to derive something out of some other more fundamental things. It is a fundamental principle that reasoning is lacking.
Okay. I mean, reason cannot provide some of these answers, but Dawkins would argue that he does provide an answer. He says the answer is our DNA is just making us do these things, and that you have to have the courage to accept that and just live that way, right? So let me see what Daniel has to say first, and let's see. Daniel?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Cliff. I would say that if we're talking about valid, like technically anything is necessarily like, is a valid answer in terms of like it's emotionally, it's emotionally valid. But if in terms of is this a definition that we should all agree upon, that's a different question. And if I can answer if I can attempt to answer the second question, which I think is what you're trying to get with, are these valid definitions of faith? I think the problem with their definitions is they're very negative to begin with. They're not even attempting to be neutral. And something is complicated and is widespread with faith. Like it's generally it's a matter of just kind of wanting to be intellectually honest. Like you don't approach this with your own bias to begin with. And I would say that there's a kernel of what they say is true, that faith is kind of the belief in something without supporting evidence. But I think the other half they missed, that I think someone in the Tang family group was trying to get at, was that it's the idea of trying to lead your life in a way that you don't have to correspond to evidence or previous life experiences. So like being a good person, like that's motivated a lot by faith than it is by science. And so I think that the problem with what they present are very incomplete bias definitions, because they don't mention that other part of it's not just about believing in something because of lack of evidence. It's how you correspond and shape your life according to that belief.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, definitely when you see Dawkins' definition of faith, it's totally bonkers, right? It's total absence of supporting evidence. Does anybody live their life? I mean, like that, even in what you may think are, religions which might not make sense to you, the people believe, they still have some kind of reason to believe. Maybe they presented a sacrifice to their gods, and then something good happened for them. I don't know. Or the priests tell them, this is the way it is, and it seems to make sense to them. So is it total absence of supporting evidence? That seems kind of unfair. Mary, what do you have to say? Mary?
Yeah. My feeling is it's really kind of interesting. I think it's really kind of a scientific, reasoning from these bad faith predictions, that it basically they're suggesting there's a weakness or a mental illness of people who blindly, as they see, believe or have a faith in something. So it really, I think it just smacks of it's a true scientist that says I need a hypothesis and a finding. You know what I mean? So that would be my thinking, that it just really it banks upon this kind of scientific thinking that unless you've got a hypothesis that you can prove, then it doesn't exist. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So,
all right. I'll go back to Daniel first.
Well, actually, I think Tim hasn't spoken yet, so I'll let Tim speak first.
Okay.
It's interesting, Cliff, what you said about Dawkins would say you need to have the courage to deny faith. And what Dawkins is expressing is in and of itself a faith, right? He doesn't actually know for certain that he's correct, and yet he's espousing something that he violently believes in.
Well, okay. To that, I think he would say that he does believe he is correct in all these things he's claiming.
Yes, but it's a belief. It's not something you can absolutely prove.
I think this goes back to Alice's question. Yeah. So what's a fact and what is faith, right? What is a belief and what is fact? To him, what he believes are facts. And he says, you guys are crazy because we all know these are the facts and the truth, but you all don't believe it. So I think that's how he sees. That's how he sees what his beliefs to him are facts. And that again is the question. Which set of facts? So really, we should be asking. Well, these facts that you believe, let's take a look at them. Let's see if these facts are true. But then you got to figure out what those beliefs are, and then examine them, right? So here's probably something that he would claim. Evidentialism It says it is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything on insufficient evidence. Yeah, Daniel.
Well, and this goes to the point I was going to raise. I think so. The big part of this is faith versus the idea is like faith is in stark opposite contrast to reason. But even like if you look at historical examples of people that try to model societies based completely on quote unquote reason, they ended up in fact also being completely based on faith. And for me, the great examples are Maoist China, the Soviet Union. I mean, communism itself is like the idea of like we're gonna completely eradicate religion from society and base this completely on faith, completely basis on reason, the idea of economic principles. But it turns out if you look at those societies in general, like their very fundamentals were also based on ideas that could not be proven. The idea of a communist utopia, the idea that people will just like kind of naturally work together. So even when you try to build societies based completely eradicated of faith, you end up just substituting new types of faith, and I'd argue much worse types of faith, into the equation. So the idea that you can fully eradicate society without beliefs based on evidentialism it's just contrary to what has historically happened. It's theoretically just impossible as well, because there's always going to be gaps in what human knowledge and people have. And in order to fill those gaps, you fill it with faith. You don't fill it with scientific facts, right? For example, even if you were to question Dawkins, like, why is the universe expanding? His answer would probably be like, oh, dark energy. But dark energy is a theory. It's not actually a fact. It's just something that people have kind of plugged into the equation to make this kind of more understandable. But everywhere in human understanding, there's going to be gaps in that knowledge that we just don't have. And so what we do, we plug in ideas, and those ideas are another word for faith, I would argue.
Right. So actually, a lot of beliefs are actually faith in disguise, right? So, for example, when you mention dark energy, there's dark matter. Scientists are telling us that 95% of the universe is made of things we can't see and don't really understand. Well, that kind of sounds like a lot of faith, right? I mean, they're kind of deductions from what we've seen and trying to explain what we observe. But then you're telling us that really 95% of what's going on in the universe we don't really understand. So it's being able to expose the faith, behind the so-called facts. So I think that's also that's an interesting approach.
But I also just want to highlight the idea that like evidentialism just leads off to like a worse society in general, because when we try to build those societies based on kind of an eradication of faith, we end up getting into totalitarian societies like the Soviet Union, like Maoist China, that kind of then ironically themselves are built on pillars of faith. They just try to masquerade it as reason.
Right. Okay. But is evidentialism actually even possible? So is it, if you say it's wrong, if it's always wrong to believe anything on insufficient evidence, does this really work? Can you really function this way?
Big question is, who is the judge to decide if there is sufficient evidence?
Okay.
That is a very good point. So something like that might not work before, but nowadays you can work, right? Because everybody can download an app on your phone and then fact check everything, right? So the question is, who gives you the fact?
Right. But here's a much simpler answer to that. So let's look at this claim itself. How do you know this claim is? How do you know whether we should believe this claim? Why should we believe this claim? Yeah, Mary.
Yeah, my thinking is that just like FDA approves vitamins, it's considered a reliable source, right? So I guess maybe it's who is the source? Is it a reliable source that in fact you can trust with some level of efficiency and subject matter expertise, that indeed someone is the authority on a particular issue or whatever. So I guess maybe it's just consider the source. Is it a reliable source?
Okay, talking about source and authority. Okay, those are important thoughts. We'll come back to that later. Tim?
The statement itself is contradictory, right? It is wrong always, everywhere, for anyone to believe anything on insufficient evidence. In order to believe the statement, you would have to have total knowledge. So the statement is saying it's wrong to believe the statement.
Right. The statement itself is self-refuting, right? Because you have no reason to believe that statement. I mean, do you have sufficient evidence to believe it's wrong? To believe anything on sufficient evidence? No, you don't. The statement destroys itself, right? So think about it. It's self-refuting. Now, here we have Hume, again, a very famous philosopher. He says if we take any book and let's ask ourselves, does it talk about abstract reasoning about quantity or number? And he's talking about theological books like the Bible or something, or commentary on the Bible or something, talking about something spiritual. Well, no, it doesn't. Does it contain experimental reasoning about fact and existence? No, right? Then he says committed to the flames because it's nothing but sophistry and illusion. Does this work?
Just like most of these statements, they are typically self-refuting, because it said, well, you look at the book, does it include experimental reasoning concerning the matter of fact? Well, where do you get all the experimental facts and reasoning? There's a methodology behind all that. But his is refuted.
Yeah. I mean, similarly, his claim refutes itself, because his claim is not talking about abstract reasoning about quantity or number. It's not about experimental reasoning of facts and existence. So his claim should be committed to the flames, right? So that's the problem with these demands for only evidence refute themselves. Now, this is just a purely philosophical and logical sense, right? So again, if we did require evidence for our beliefs? We talked about that a little bit, so we're just gonna go past this part. Again, so if you wanted to live your life, just think of a single day trying to live like that, and you would just go bananas, right? So when you wake up, is this is this your family? Is this your house? How do you know that? You thought it was last night, but is this the same place? But let's not. We want to move on to So if you really want to be go by reason alone, you really want to be skeptical, here's where you got to go. So the 5-minute hypothesis. What if all you're seeing and experiencing right now was created just 5 minutes ago? All the memories you have right now, given to you 5 minutes ago. How do you know that's not the case? Right? How can you disprove that? It's very, very difficult, or if not impossible, right? Can you prove that this hypothesis is false? So if you really want to be skeptical, you got to ask questions like this. You know, what if all I'm experiencing now, what if all my memories were just given to me in the past 24 hours, in the past hour? You can't prove that wasn't the case. What about what we're experiencing right now? What if you're just a brain in a jar, right? Descartes, he asked the question, a lot of times when I'm dreaming, it seems so real. Everything seems real. And then I wake up, right? So how do I know I'm not dreaming right now? How can I prove that? I don't know. Can you prove that? What about the future? So that's the brain in the jar. Maybe all of us are just brains in jars, right? You've heard people, some people say maybe we're just in a simulation. Okay. What about the future? Does it really exist? I mean, how do we know the future is coming? Right? There's no way to prove the future is coming. We're just experiencing each moment, currently in the present. So what if we wake up? You haven't dreamed, you wake up, but what if we wake up from right now? Then what can you believe about the future? Right? Not much. And to put it in more popular terms, if you've seen the film, the music, The Matrix, the movie The Matrix. Again, what it is it's the idea that these people are actually living in a simulation, right? Everything they see is controlled by a computer, and they just have to figure out how to manipulate the computer code. And when they do, they wake up and they discover that they're actually just living in these tubes, right? They're being fed sensory information. Their brains are being fed sensory information, and that's where they're living. So how can you prove that this isn't the case? So this is what skepticism, true skepticism will lead you to. Again, if we think about categories of beliefs about the past, present, and future, right? What are our sources for beliefs about the past? Why do we believe what we believe about the past?
Pictures?
Pictures, okay. Pictures, okay. What else? How is pictures real? What?
Our memory of things?
A memory of things, right? Oh, by the way, if you remember pictures, I just want to remember this guy. But okay, our memories, right? What else?
They are corroboration.
Corroboration, right? Okay.
Only in my own mind, right? They exist in my parents, in my children, in my friends, my coworkers. They share some of the same memories.
Okay.
The strong evidence.
So these are the main sources of our beliefs about the past, right? But when we talk about the testimony of other people, what is that based on? What is their testimony based on?
Their memory.
It's based on their memory, right? How do we know that our memories can ever be reliable? Yeah. Daniel.
I guess somewhat to the question of, how do we know that something in the past happened? I had a conversation with Guan earlier. I think it was like a week ago.
Do you think?
Or maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. But from what my memory of that conversation, I made the point that the reason I believe that Jesus existed as a person, but I don't have any proof that maybe Moses existed, is that the Romans wrote about Jesus, and the Romans had no reason to write about Jesus. So my point here is that sometimes we know that something is true from records because someone writes about them without any benefit to themselves. Like the Romans had there was no benefit to them to write about Jesus as a person. Like when you look at records like from Josephus Flavius, he writes about him as kind of like as a neutral, inconsequential person.
Right.
And that's why we know that he existed at the very least, regardless of what the religious beliefs might be. And we know that he existed as a person because the Romans, without having any other alternate reason to do so, wrote about him. Whereas we don't necessarily have the same, for example, about Moses with the Egyptians. We don't, at least as we have now, we don't have any records of the Egyptians writing about a guy named Moses, but we do about the Roman records about a guy named Jesus, and we can trust those Roman records to a degree because we have to have some faith in those Roman records because there was no, at least from what we can tell, there was no benefit for the Romans of writing about Jesus. Therefore, we can kind of logically deduct that this person did exist because he was objectively written about without any. Yeah,
right. It's like it's almost kind of like hostile witnesses if they testify in your favor, right? That's what you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. So these are reasonable. These are good reasons to believe. For example, certain facts about life of Jesus. But again, if you go to total skepticism, you can't believe anything because even written records are based upon memories, right? And sometimes the memories are faulty, right? You probably all heard. If you go to law school, they'll make a guy in a gorilla suit running into the room, and everybody in the class will have a different recollection of what happened. So if we know memories are faulty once, we know memories can be faulty a lot of times. But anyway, I think really, all we're looking at here is that if you really claim to only go by evidence, you're in a lot of trouble. Okay. So for example, let's look at science and induction, right? So there's deductive reasoning versus inductive reasoning. So deductive reasoning is you have premises, right? So if you say, oh, dim sum is yummy, and then you say hakao is dim sum, therefore hakao is yummy, right? So that's deductive reasoning. Inductive is different. Inductive is the sun rose in the past week, therefore it's probably going to rise again tomorrow, right? Now, you can never be certain because, you've heard of the black swans, right? At one time we knew, oh yeah, there's no such thing as a black swan, but then they found black swans. So, what kind of reasoning is science based on? Science is based on inductive reasoning, right? Inductive. So it's things we assume, we kind of with a high probability, right? So, so it's kind of strange to consider that science is based upon. It's really a weak form of reasoning. Now it works and it's very useful, okay, but still, like I said earlier, can we be sure that gravity works the same in the whole universe? We can't say that with 100%, certainty, but we say 99%, right? Good enough. Okay, I just want to leave on this thing by Kant, and we'll pick up the rest some more next week, which is, so the Enlightenment kind of tell us that reason and science can access reality. All human knowledge is based on experience, right? All our experience comes through our 5 senses, but we have no basis to assume our experience of reality actually corresponds to reality itself. Because all we can really know is our experience, which is filtered through our senses, right? So you may be sitting, you may look and say, oh, I'm sitting on a blue chair, but is that really what's going on? I mean, your brain feels you're sitting on a chair, your brain sees the color blue, but can you really prove that's what reality actually is? What if the chair is really orange, but what your brain is telling you is blue? You can't prove that's not the case. So really, everything we know is filtered through our senses, right, in the brain, and we can't really know if that's what reality is really like. I don't know. Is that
You're talking like someone who is colorblind. his perception of things will be very different, right? So how do we know that he's wrong, that we're right?
Yeah, but really what he's saying is that all we can ever do is go by what we are experiencing through our senses. We can't really access reality itself. If we're thinking through just pure reason, right? Pure logic, that's what we're left with, right? So let's stop here for today since time is up. And any last comments or feedback before we close? So really, what we're trying to do today is examine that when if we claim to be living purely by reason and purely by evidence, well, we're left in some very, very difficult places. Okay, and it's really difficult to function that way. So everybody lives by faith, a certain amount of faith, and we have decided, which facts are worth believing, based perhaps on authority. Authority itself is based on really on memory, and in a sense, a collective memory, and we trust that collective memory. Sometimes the collective memory is wrong in spectacular ways, right? And we'll look at some examples next week, But so thank you all for being here and for your thoughts and comments. And let's close with a prayer. And I'll stick around for a little bit more if you want to just chat for a few minutes afterwards. Okay, so let's pray. Father, we thank you that you have given us the gift of reason and our minds, and we ask that you help us to take this and glorify you with it, to try to think your thoughts after you and to appreciate your wisdom. We pray also that you help us to examine doubts, and not only the doubts we have, but those that are brought to us by friends, by family, and to examine them in a way that is fair and again that will show your wisdom. We pray now that you help us to take this and worship you in a way that you deserve. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, thank you everyone, and I'll just stick on if you have any more discussion you want to have.